Hey guys, welcome to session 3 of Boundaries. This is entitled The Laws of Boundaries Part 1. Now, overall, when we wrote the book Boundaries, we went through basically all of life and all the scriptures as best we could tell and figured out that there are a lot of different aspects that look different on the surface, but when you kind of factor analyze them and group them together, what's the essence of it? That we found 10 basic principles that govern the life of boundaries and what boundaries are really about. And we call those the laws of boundaries. And in this session, we're going to go through the first 5 of those and talk about the principles. Now, here's the value of this. If you ever have like a problem, which I know you don't have problems, but your friends do. So if you're ever helping a friend with a problem, here's what they're going to do. They're going to come up to you and say, oh, I got this problem with my teenager who won't do their homework, or they're acting out or something, or I got this adult sibling that's always hitting me up for money, or I'm in a relationship with a person who's mean or abusive or isn't carrying their end of the deal, or I got this employee or whatever it is. And what you'll end up doing sometimes is you think, oh gosh, what's the answer to this problem? And what the laws of boundaries do is they relieve you of all of that and put you above it so you know the principle that applies to that situation, and then you know the right thing to do. If you go to court, what's going to happen is whether you're arguing over, a car wreck or a slip and fall or a divorce or a bunch of other stuff, every one of those scenarios looks different. One time somebody ran through a red light, another time somebody did this or somebody did that. But the judge doesn't have to know the make of the car or who said, this in what kind of voice or how long you've known them or this, that, and the other. Certainly those factors enter in. But what they're judging on is not coming up with a different answer to each problem. They're judging according to the law, the principle that applies there. Once you learn the principle, no matter what situation your kid is having, you know what principle is being violated. And that'll tell you what to do. Okay? This will become clear as we go forward. Okay. Law number 1, the law of sowing and reaping. The law of sowing and reaping. Basically, this comes from the Bible, and what does it say? Whatever a person sows, that shall they also reap. Meaning that there should be a relationship in life between cause and effect. Okay? We depend on this law every day for good, right? We've got to be able to sow in order to reap. If you're hungry and you're on the couch, what do? You sow to a sandwich. You get up, you sow effort, you sow behavior, you walk to the refrigerator, you make yourself a sandwich, and the effect of that is you reap the disappearance of your hunger. Now, if you go do that 18 times, you're going to reap something else, right? You're going to also have the other side of sowing and reaping, that when we sow to irresponsibility or being out of control, then we should reap the consequences of that. The way I like to think about this is if you sow, there is a consequence, right? If I drop this, the law of gravity says that something's going to happen. It's going to fall, right? Unless, what did I do? I interrupted the law. And the consequence didn't happen. See, it wasn't like there's a consequence. It's like, huh? And then I interrupted it and I catch it. Well, disappeared there. That's exactly what a codependent does. See, if somebody's out of control and they're out of control of their life, then they should fall and hit bottom and have the consequences of that. But what the codependent does is step in and catches them, and the codependent reaps the consequences. That's why, like in session 1, I talked about the parent of the adult child who kept bailing them out over and over and over, and the adult child wasn't studying, flunking out of colleges, using drugs, and the parents were reaping the consequences of the behavior that the son was sowing. And you see that in relationships all the time. Remember, I talked about if this is you and this is the other person. If the other person is out of control of some behavior, like they're using drugs, or they have a rage problem, or they're abusive, or they're mean, or they're toxic, or whatever it is, then they should reap the consequences of that. And that's what boundaries do. You go to them and you say, you know what? I don't like using drugs, and I don't like anybody in my house using drugs. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to have to live over here apart from me. Or if you're an employer and somebody's not pulling their weight, they're not showing up, what happens? Well, there's going to be a consequence to that. You get a, day home without pay. Or we give you the opportunity to go be successful somewhere else. But there's consequences. And this orders life until we don't have boundaries. And if we don't have boundaries, what's happening? Well, the law of sowing and reaping gets totally upside down. And somebody has a behavior, but the consequences, the pain of that behavior, they never have to face the pain. And the consequences of this behavior fall over in the wrong yard. Remember what I said about the tree? Like if they got a tree growing in their yard and they're not trimming it and it falls over the fence and crashes your roof, that's not right. It shouldn't be that way. And boundaries say, no. The consequences of that's your behavior. So now you have to pay the consequences. And so this happens in all areas of life. Emotionally, if somebody's being abusive, what a boundary does is says, you know what, I don't like being yelled at. And I don't like somebody screaming at me that way. And I would like for you to stop that, right? And so then they have to take control of it. That's the first consequence, is a healthy, loving confrontation. But then if they don't, then you might have to go further. Like we talked about in Matthew 18, where ultimately somebody continues that, a couple of people might have to talk to them. Or ultimately, sometimes you might have to separate yourself and say, you know what, as long as you're screaming and angry, I'm going to go in the other room, and when you want to talk about this without yelling at me or calling me names, I'll be glad to. See, the consequences, they end up with some sort of consequence. That's the law of sowing and reaping. So ask yourself, is there a relationship where somebody's out of control of their behavior, but you're the one paying the consequences for that? Sowing and reaping has been violated, and that'll help you figure it out. Okay, number 2, the law of responsibility. And what the law of responsibility says is that responsibility goes 2 ways. Let's do it another way. 2 directions, or 2 different ways. There's responsibility for and responsibility to, okay? Talked about this a little bit in the first session. And if this is me and this is my neighbor over here, I am responsible for everything that goes on inside of me, my own boundaries, my own property. But if this is you and we're in a relationship, I am responsible to you, and you are responsible for yourself. So 2 is in between us. Like, go back to the example I gave about the father and the son. See, the father was not responsible for the son's drug use, for the son's not studying, for the son partying all the time. But what happened was he ultimately was taking responsibility for all that because he was paying for it and he was enabling it, and he kept giving in and trying to bail him out and all of that. The whole while the son not taking responsibility for himself. So what we did was we cleared up the boundaries. The father had to take responsibility for his enabling behavior, for his lack of limits, and for the ways in which he wasn't setting those limits. And he had to start being responsible to his son and say, son, no more. I'm not going to pay for this anymore until you take responsibility for your life. If you start studying and you get the grades, then I'll help you. If not, I'm done. Okay? So that's how responsibility 4 and 2 works. If you've got somebody that's a substance abuser, you got somebody that's abusive, you got somebody, kids not doing their homework, your responsibility is to take responsibility for your side of the equation and go to them and be responsible to them. It says that we are responsible to speak the truth in love, to confront each other. We're responsible to setting limits. We're responsible to warn people. Remember I talked about one of the early places where this law was set out in the scriptures? In Leviticus 19, it says, do not pervert justice. It's so fascinating. It says, do not be partial to the needy or show favoritism to the great. So when do we not hold people accountable? Well, when we feel sorry for them and we think they're too needy to be held responsible for anything, or they're so powerful that we're afraid to hold them responsible for anything. This happens in a lot of places where somebody's afraid to be the whistleblower, right? Because there's all sorts of fear involved. And sometimes you have to get strength in order to say no to the great and powerful. You might have to call the cops. You might have to get a restraining order, but it still has to be done. So it says, don't lose your boundaries to the needy or to the powerful. But then it says this. Now watch this. This is scary about this law. It says that you can't pervert justice. And if you do that, it says, look at verses 15 and 17 in Leviticus 19. It says if you do that, that you will be held responsible for part of the guilt of that. See, it's very interesting. Way back when they started studying substance abuse, and if this is the drunk, and this is the family, and the family's enabling that, what they found was when they tried to get this person sober, they found that they had to treat the whole family because the family was enabling it. And the family is actually part of the problem. It's like the father was part of the problem with the son. How is the son going to learn to take responsibility for his life if he's out of control and he has a new house, a new condo, all the money he needs, no requirements? He's not going to learn anything. So we actually share in part of the problem if we're not setting those limits. That's why we have to be responsible to people, to tell them the truth and to confront them when necessary and to hold them accountable. That's responsibility law, the law of responsibility, which is boundaries law number 2. Boundaries law number 3 is the law of power. The law of power. Now, what does this mean? This is an interesting paradox. If this is me and this is you, you know what I want to do in my life? I want to control you. You know why? Because I'm a human being. And if you're honest, you want to control other people because we're all control freaks. Now, there's 2 kinds of control freaks. There are control freaks that aggressively go over and try to force people to do stuff, right? Those are the boundary busters. But there's also control freaks that passively do this, and they are called people pleasers. Right? So how do they control people? They try to be good enough so this person will like them. They try to not have any boundaries and never say no so this person's not upset with them. That's just as controlling when we're people pleasers, or we give in to people, or we try to keep them happy with us, or we try to live up to their expectations. Why? For their own good? Absolutely not. It's so they will like us and we get what we want. See, that's still the problem. And so what it means to have power in the Bible sense and in everything we know about healthy functioning in psychology or psychiatry is basically you cannot control another person. And we do not have the power of other control. If we did, that'd be great. We could make everybody do whatever we wanted to and treat us well and be nice and loving and all that. We don't have that power. In fact, sometimes we don't even have the power of self-control because we've been out of control trying to control everybody else. So the first thing that we have to face in the law of power is we do not have the power to control another person and to make them do anything, okay? What do we have the power to do? We basically have the power to take ownership and responsibility of ourselves, what the Bible calls the fruit of self-control. That the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, the power to be in control of oneself. Now, the magic of the paradox is once we have the power of self-control, okay, we do have that ability of self-control, then what happens? Then we have influence. And we become salt and light to other people by getting in control of ourselves. When the Father got in control of himself, he could influence the behavior of his Son. Still can't control it. but he can treat him in a way that would give the best opportunity for that kind of self-control to develop over here. So how do we get the power of self-control when we're out of control? If you've ever been to a 12-step group, what do they say? That we are powerless. I came to the place where I was powerless over my addiction. Okay. Well, that sounds weird. I just said you got the power of self-control. But if we don't have the fruit of self-control, we haven't developed it yet, what do we have the power over? If I'm powerless over the addiction, how does that work? It's a paradox. Here's how it works. In fact, the Bible says, blessed are the poor in spirit. That's kind of step one in the 12-step world. Okay. Here's the deal. You have the power to confess that you're out of control. That's the first step of power. The power to humble yourself before God and before others and say, I got a problem. We got the power to confess. We've got the power to submit ourselves to God and to others for help. Please pump some power into me. I need encouragement. I need support. I need help. I need for you to, tell me what to do over here. God, give me strength. And we lean on our support system to give us strength. That's why addicts go to meetings. They're getting power of the community to encourage them, put courage into them, for example, to help the weak, as 1 Thessalonians 5 says. To help the weak, to help the faint-hearted. And we have the power to go find power by asking for help. Isn't that an incredible paradox? So what are we talking about? Confession and powerlessness and brokenness. We could admit that. We also have the power to forgive, because that's a letting go of something. See, it's powerlessness that gives you power. And when you forgive, you start to have self-control, because this wacky person out there no longer has control of you because you're holding a grudge. Okay? We have the power to grieve, the ability to face our losses and our pain. We have the power to take little steps of risks and learn new skills. Notice I didn't say you have the power to have the skills. You have the power, though, to take steps to learn the skills. You have the power to go say you're sorry. You have the power to make amends. And you know what we find about all these things? Interesting. I just gave you a list of things that give you power, and each one of them is an act of brokenness and weakness, not strength. Isn't that an amazing paradox? That the way we become powerful is actually through weakness and humility and brokenness. And have you ever noticed an addict? You'll never see anything weak and broken and anything. They're like into controlling people. They're full of rage and control. They're control freaks. And they're totally out of control of their lives. But when we start getting in the path of growth and admit our powerlessness, our brokenness, our need, reach out to others, get help and support, have them teach us, take that teaching and receive it and take a little step and learn that skill, and that skill becomes part of us, and learn to forgive and learn to make amends and all that, then we just get stronger and stronger and stronger while being humble the whole way. And that is the path of strength. And that's how the law of power works. The next one, the law of respect. Oh my goodness, you're going to hate this one. You're going to hate this one. But like most things we hate, it has the power to set you free. Okay, here's how it works. Everybody loves the message of boundaries, because we come and say, hey, you know what? It's okay for you to say no. It's okay for you to not put up with abuse. It's okay for you to set limits. In fact, it's more than okay. God actually requires it from you. And so everybody's going, oh, great, this is awesome. I don't have to take this abuse anymore. I don't have to deal with these wackos and their behavior. I can require them to be responsible. Boundaries, what a great message, until they get to this law. And you know what this law says? It says that all that stuff we talked about, where you're having boundaries so people learn to respect your values and all of that, it cuts both ways. Not only do we have boundaries so people will respect our values, but we must respect the boundaries of others. We must respect the boundaries of others. Treat others as you would want to be treated. So here's a question. How do you like the word no? We love to say no. Boy, is that nice. But when we want something from somebody and they say no to us, Do we respect their no and grant them the freedom and continue to love them when they say no? See, that cuts across a lot of areas. Sometimes what we're asking them to do is actually a good thing for them. You know, if you go back to the session number 1 where the father with the out of control son, if the father says, look, son, I will help you, but I'll pay for college, but only if you start making grades. What if the son says no to that deal? No, you know, how can you cut me off? You know, you're so mean and all this kind of stuff, and doesn't agree to the terms. Can the father respect the son's choices to not get sober and say, well, I love you, but I'm going to respect your choice. And part of respect is you give them the consequences and the freedom to go their own way. And see, if you're ever going to help an addict, you got to set them free and say, look, you can continue to use drugs if you want to. I will respect your choice. But if you do that, then here's what it means. Instead of trying to control them and nag them and all that, which we know doesn't work. And sometimes, you know, it's not that we're trying to offer them help that they say no to. Remember the rich young ruler, when he asked Jesus, how do I get to heaven? And Jesus gave him the terms. The rich young ruler didn't like that and he walked away. Jesus respected his no. God will respect everybody's no. You know, there's all this stuff about people say, how can God send somebody to hell? God doesn't send anybody to hell. God offers heaven to every human being. He says, if you'll just come unto me, okay, then I want you. Some people say no to God. They don't want a relationship with Jesus. And they say, no, I don't want that. And God respects their no. He's having a big party. You don't want to come to it. That's fine. But wherever God isn't is darkness and pain. So he respects that. And we have to too. Now, sometimes what people are saying no to is actually not something good we're trying to give them, something we want from them. Hey, will you go to lunch with me? Or, hey, can you lend me $10? Or, hey, you know, I'd like to hang out on Saturday or whatever. And they are also free to say, you know what, I'd like to do that, but I was planning on reading a good book, or I was planning on cleaning out my garage or whatever. Do we withdraw love when someone says no to what we want from them? Do we judge their no? Do you pout? Do you go into silent treatment? Do you say, oh, I thought you cared. I thought we were friends. And all this kind of manipulative stuff, that's not freedom. So if we're going to have good relationships, we have to respect the boundaries of other people. And then the next one, so what do we got so far? We got sowing and reaping, responsibility, power, respect. And then law number 5 is the law of motivation. Motivation, which basically gets to the intent or the heart of why we do something. See, codependents a lot of times are giving, but they're not really giving. They're giving in out of fear. So what we have to do in life is we have to look at what is our intentionality when we do something? What is the reason we're doing something? And there are basically a few of these. We are giving, serving, extending energy, extending ourselves out of love. And what does that mean? It's out of love. Okay, I'm saying yes to you. I'm giving you time or giving you money or giving you whatever it is because I want that for you. Okay, love is requiring something good for someone else. So if we help somebody, we're doing it because we love them, because we care. Another reason that we would do things is our own desire. There's something in it for us. I really want something here. And so, we're going to spend time together, whatever, because that's a good thing. And I want that. Okay. But here's the problem. Sometimes we give in, we give our time, our money, our hearts, our bodies, our resources, whatever it is that you're giving away, heart, mind, soul, strength. It's not really out of love. It's out of something else. It's out of some kind of fear or out of guilt. that you really don't want to give it, but you're afraid that if you say no, they're going to get angry or abandon you or some kind of fear like that, or you're going to feel guilty. Let me give you a great verse about motivation. 2 Corinthians 9:7. And here's what it says. It says, give as you have purposed. That means chosen, intentional. Purpose is what I said earlier, intentionality. So give as you really choose to. You're purposeful. There's a good reason for this. Give as you have purposed in your heart, the verse says, not begrudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Begrudgingly is when somebody pressures you from the outside. It's external pressure where they're pressuring you to do something, and you say yes, but inwardly you feel begrudging of it because you're not really giving, you're giving in to pressure. And the boundary buster has come and forced you to do this. And then you kind of hold a grudge and you resent it. So you're doing a bunch of stuff you really resent. That is not pretty. And it always comes out and always screws things up. Okay? So that's the fear part of this, giving in. The second part of the verse says, not begrudgingly or under compulsion. A compulsion is when we have some sort of should in our head, right? Some sort of should that says, I really don't do this, but I feel bad if I don't. Well, that's not love. I mean, what if somebody, you ask them to go to lunch with you or whatever, they don't want to be there, but they're going to feel guilty if they don't. You don't want that lunch, right? Find somebody that wants to be there. So here's the point, that there is a law of motivation, and we need to check ourselves to ask, is my giving here purposeful? Are you bailing out that son because you know that's the best thing to do, to bail them out because that's going to give a guaranteed good result that's good for them? Or are you bailing them out because you're really afraid they're going to be mad at you, or afraid of what might happen or whatever, afraid of the pain that they might have to suffer when they hit bottom, or because you feel guilty when you say no to them? That's not purposeful. And what happens is you get the experts involved who are purposeful to help your son. They help you to begin to say no. And that's the way this works. So we got to look at the motive. Okay? So there's the first 5 principles. In the next session, we'll be going over the next ones. And what goes on here, when we think about these principles, again, when a situation comes into your life, you know, and you got a kid, or you got a relationship, or you got a friend, or you got a family member, or extended family member, or whatever it is, and the boundaries are being crossed, somebody's not taking responsibility, and the consequences of that are falling in somebody else's yard. One of these principles is going to be being violated. And so what you do is you look at the principle and you say, gosh, I see what's going on here. Sowing and reaping is being violated. This person's out of control, but everybody else is reaping. We got to have some boundaries so the person is out of control begins to reap the consequences of it. Or it could be the law of power. It could be saying, you know what, we've been trying to get this person to clean up their act. We don't have the power to do that. We can't change them. All we have the power to do is to get control of ourselves and be responsible, the other law, responsible to them. The law of responsibility. See, we've been out of control of ourselves trying to take responsibility for them, and we're not being responsible to them in the process. Or then we're not respecting their no, or we're not looking at our motivation. So look at the principle. It'll help bring clarity to a number of these situations.